Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to this Peachy Coochy event. My name's Tom Roden. I'm going to be doing some comparing, which I don't quite know what that's going to entail at the moment. I think the technical thing is going to be working quite well. I think the presenters are going to be working quite well because I've been chatting with them. Some of them are a little bit nervous. Some of them are quite excited. But as Murdad said, all of them, without doubt, are going to be explosive. Maybe. Hands up who's been to a Peachy Coochy event before. I'm going to say that's about 30%. Thank you, hands down. When I accepted this gig, looked up what a Peachy Coochy... I accepted it and then looked up what Peachy Coochy was on Wikipedia. Of course, I accepted it. I'm a freelancer. I don't do anything. And it says on Wikipedia, nothing at all. And that's because Peachy Coochy is the actual original. This is a rip-off. We're happy about that. Each presenter has 20 slides and 20 seconds to talk at each slide. And at the end, Leah's going to sound a gong, I think. Leah, can we have a test on the gong? Explosive. I think it sounds like a tin of biscuits. It's not far off. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, should we give a warm round of applause to our first presenter today and wish her all the best in this undertaking of 20 slides and 20 seconds for each slide. Subhatra Subramanian.
So I am a choreographer, I am a science teacher, and I work a lot with scientists. And I make work that I hope instills a curiosity in people, and also I hope makes people think slightly differently. Now I'm very lucky that I get to wear all of those different hats, and I teach science to 11 to 16-year-olds, and I also use science to make dance, so I feel very fortunate in what I get to do on a day-to-day basis. A lot of the work that I do has come from my science background, but also that I work for long periods of time with scientists and in educational establishments. I have made work in some of the most remote places, including one of the northernmost inhabited places on the planet, in Svalbard in Norway, as part of a project called Cape Farewell. I work with climate change artists, scientists, to raise awareness about climate change to young people and to people all over the world. And one of the things I did was to create a piece of work in front of a glacier. One of the first pieces of work I made is called The Shiver, and it was a collaboration with a scientist called Morten Kringelbach, who you'll be happy to know is a neuroscientist. Quite early on, I decided that I was going to work with people with really interesting names, and The Shiver was all about pain and pleasure. Where and how do we feel pain and pleasure? We even went to the extent of having our nails scraping the floor of the theatre. It's really exploring physically what it is like to feel pain and pleasure. And I worked with Morten from Oxford University for really quite long periods of time in the studio with the dancers, really understanding where in that brain pain and pleasure is. So I spend lots of time really understanding the science and the context. It's a very emotional, my work is quite emotional because I'm really trying to get to the heart of the scientific concepts. Although it's factual, I have these beautiful bodies as dancers to create movement. And for me, the emotion and the body are so part of creating work. Another work I created is called Elixir. It's all about our cultural relationship with water. How we feel. I've been to India to research it. I spent 11 days on a train traveling around India researching it. I went to the Arctic 5 times as part of the Cape Farewell project. All of this, working with scientists, sociologists, geographers, town planners, created this piece of work, was all about water. All of my collaborators work with me, understand the science. I spent a year being an artist in residence at the Environment Institute at University College London, and in that time, all that time I spent with the scientists culminated in this piece of work. But what I could not do with dance was show the beauty in every single drop of water. So the work that I created was alongside an installation There was a lot of projection that we used to show water and the relationship we have with it, but on the floor as opposed to projection at the back. I also asked a sculptor to create 10 small pieces of sculpture about the beauty of every single drop of water. Now, we took a piece about the scarcity of water and performed it outside in the pouring rain. So there's a lot of juxtapositions that kind of come about when you create work like this, and this was created purely for the outside. We had 5 versions of the piece: for heavy rain, for no rain, wearing shoes, no shoes. In Bharatanatyam we wear no shoes, so we broke all the rules possible. These were the sculptures that I asked the sculptor to create, and it really looks at every single drop of water. He worked really closely with chemists to create surfaces on everyday materials that allowed water to behave in a way that allowed us to watch and appreciate it. That is a hydrophobic layer on that piece of stone, and it basically allows water to just sit on there for long enough for you to be able to look and appreciate water. And every single piece of sculpture that he created allowed us to appreciate it. And this went on before the dance performance. And then we came to the theatre and watched the dance. This is a piece he created where the actual layer that you see on there was sprayed with a chemical that allowed the water to turn into tiny little globules. Underneath there is a piece by Heraclitus, and the gist of the piece is you never stand in the same river twice. And the idea is when the water gets to a place that magnifies the image and allows you to read it. At the end of every performance, I have something called a café scientifique. I bring in the science specialist, I bring in the dancers, there's myself, one of my collaborators, we talk. This is where the audience get a chance to ask those questions, those curiosities, those ways of thinking, and it's all about engaging people, allowing people to ask the questions. This is my most recent piece. It's called Under My Skin. It's about taking the very closed, intimate, private world of the operating theatre to a dance venue, to theatres, to allow people to engage with what happens during surgery. I spent a long time in operating theatres watching surgery after surgery after surgery and really understanding the choreography of how surgeons, anaesthetists work, scrub nurses work, and really what happens, how do people feel. Bharatanatyam is so deeply rooted in hand gestures. It is so rich as a vocabulary, and I realised quite quickly how beautifully it lends itself to doing a piece about surgery. This is Roger Kneebone, a professor of surgical education, you'll be glad to hear. He does a lot of public engagement work in this inflatable operating theatre that goes up and comes down in 3 minutes. He does a lot of work about getting people interested in surgery. And that's how we did a lot of our research. We went and watched. These are my dancers actually practicing keyhole surgery, not on real people, but on, just thought I'd add that in. Actually practicing keyhole surgery and understanding what it feels like to physicalize real surgical procedures. And that's the process. So much of the work is about understanding the process of science. Science is incredibly creative. It is so deeply rooted in creativity. And I'm so interested in how is it that we as artists can work with scientists to really enliven that public engagement of science and getting people interested in science. And it's a piece where the dancers wear scrubs, but it's not about mimicry, it's not about copying, but it's about using it as a way to create work. I create work on a lot of young people. This was performed in a place called London, on the island of Svalbard in Norway, in the Norwegian Arctic. It's a bunch of young people I took away as part of this Cape Farewell project to raise awareness about climate change, and they're doing a Bharatanatyam piece. It's a gestural movement in the middle of a place called London. And my current piece is all about, I'm researching a piece about young people and mental health, and I'm the artist in residence at the Maudsley Hospital and in the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Unit, and it's about creating a live art piece about young people, mental health, and really looking specifically at self-harm and how we can get young people to engage with the arts and also to come and watch art to talk about subjects like mental health.
See, it's easy, isn't it? It's dead easy. Are you ready for another? Yes. Someone said to me, it's like, this is like just a minute. But, which I thought was a particularly brilliant and apt middle-class British kind of comparison for this event. Okay, next, shall we have another gentle, warm round of applause for our next presenter, Pantea Lotfian.
was a little girl, I wanted to go to the moon and build the spaceship myself. I also wanted to go to the deep sea and discover all the fish that Jacques Cousteau has not yet found. There was many things I wanted to do. I really wanted to be an engineer. When I fall down and cried, my dad would tell me, "Oh, come on, get up. Do you want a dog's leg or a goat's leg instead of your painful one?" And, well, it was tough to choose, but I always had a soft spot for goats, you know. They were my favorite. When I learned to read, it was great because I didn't need to beg my mom and dad to read for me, and I could choose what to read. But it turned out that the books on the massive bookshelf was actually set just according to my height. So I could only choose what it was chosen in advance, down in the level that my height was. But life was great. It was full of joy. Until one day that Dad suddenly started being very serious when it was news. And there were a lot of new words and people were looking at each other and the eyes were sort of worried. And everything led to one specific word, and that was revolution. We made friends with the revolution. We actually went to some of the marches, me, Mom, Dad, and my brother. And all the marches ended up to the gates of the university. And the university gates became the symbol of revolution. And I couldn't wait to grow up and actually go to the university. As time went by, revolution became more and more serious. Again, we went to marches, and this time men and women were marching separately. My mom was wearing a headscarf, and also there were soldiers with the guns on all the buildings. So things have turned for some seriousness. But that said, then came celebrations. And there were soldiers everywhere, but on their guns, on the barrels of the guns, were roses and carnations. Everyone was celebrating the success of the Great Revolution. And it was wonderful. It was a great time. I think I have too much time here. Okay. And until one day in the radio, they announced that universities are going to be closed for an indefinite time until we clean them up, and they are the way of the revolution. And well, then what was the point of school? What would happen to all those dreams? Actually, why should I bother? And as time went by, actually life had become like a pomegranate tree, which was pruned too severely, and it had less and less blossoms and fruits, and the word revolution didn't bring so much shine in people's eyes anymore. It was a bit dull, actually, without university to go to, what we do with schools. But finally, one day, they opened the universities and it was announced that here you go, it's ready and you can all go there back to university. But there was a little change. Well, girls could only do girls' subjects, and all the engineering and stuff I wanted to do was for boys. So, well, okay, girls could do science to become teachers. So I chose science, or better said, microbiology, went to university and started learning about how microbial life and its wonders work. And I had quite good fun. I had a frog which actually leapt out of my hand. It was really great fun. But the most important thing was that the university had one of those old big mainframe computers, those dinosaurs which were fed punch cards. And one day appeared in a beautiful cupboard with glass doors a PC, and they said it's for computer science students. No one else can touch it. And computer science students were all boys. So I did my best to actually learn to do algorithms, and even I pleaded so much that I could get into a Fortran class. But none of that helped me to actually be able to open those glass doors and touch that PC. Well, after finishing university, I left my country and went to Vienna. In Vienna, I continued to I studied molecular biology, continued to work with microorganisms, and it was good. I started to actually be the engineer of the living cells and living things, and modified bacteria and yeast into presumably useful stuff. But the fact was that I was always fascinated by machines more. I just couldn't accept that I cannot work with machines. So it was really like, what shall I do? Until finally I decided, that's it. I want to really learn to work with machines. And there you go. This is my first machine designed. And actually, it was great. The machine gave me a lot of headaches, and I gave the machine a lot of opportunity to have a good laugh at me. Because when a biologist turns engineer, many things can go wrong. One day, I was sitting in Soho Square, and just I remembered, I wanted to go to deep sea and go to the moon and make all those incredible machines myself. But my machine is dull. It doesn't fly. It doesn't do anything particular. It just spins and spins. So I thought, I have to continue searching. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go on. But suddenly I realized one thing. I may have not become an explorer of pushing the boundaries of what's out in the world, going to the moon or deep sea. But actually I realized that I have been always pushing the boundaries of what was possible for me. So I have been an explorer in some ways. So I continued to explore until I actually discovered that there is one discipline that can help me do all I want. Well, I moved into working in innovation. And innovation helps me to explore, helps me to play and collaborate with all sorts of people, use my science. And today, actually, I work with all sorts of technologies and, most importantly, with machines, very sophisticated ones. I don't make those machines, but I work with scientists and engineers who actually finally make those machines. And I do really enjoy. The difference is, today I am not a scientist and I'm not an engineer. Actually, I am the alchemist of innovation. And that is another story. I tell you another time.
Okay, so Javad's going to do one next, and his first rehearsal, when he ran through the presentation, it took him, how long did it take you? 42 minutes. With Murdad, they've trimmed it down a little bit. Let's see how he gets on now. And yeah, you've got to use the mic. Mike. Not Mike. Javed Alipur.
So yeah, I'm a theatre maker and writer and performance poet and other bits and pieces from Yorkshire, Bradford and Leeds. I wanted to talk to you a bit about a thing I've been developing, a thing I'm trying to do in terms of my work when I'm making work about the East, that I'm calling Orientalissimo, taken from a couple of other ideas. So we start with the historical moment of Orientalism. You saw that picture before. I think in some ways this picture really nicely, sums that up. Like, as Edward Said famously identifies, there's this moment in European history when Napoleon reaches Egypt, a conquering, historically specific white man confronting, trying to talk to a mute, changeless thing made of stone. And obviously Orientalism is based on a certain kind of Foucauldian reading of how culture works. So Orientalism, as Said describes, is this what Foucault might call a dispositif, a crazy selection of different kinds of mechanisms, logics, wars, colonizations, discourses, subjects and so on, that kind of call something into being. And we see quite a good example of it in terms of how hijab is viewed in the West. So you saw that picture right at the beginning, a very Orientalist picture, and we get a modern version of it here. Again, we see pictures of two sets of Iranian women, neither of whom are looking at the camera, and as kind of the white European, we're sort of, solicited to look at that. One of the problems with this kind of way of imagining Orientalism, really, is that actually when this was identified by an Indian Marxist scholar called Ajiz Ahmed, that actually Edward Said, when he formulated this, he had to base his kind of investigations on a canon of white work that he was investigating, hence this picture that I put up, white men have stories to tell too. And in terms of this idea of like a communication between East and West that fails, there's different ways of trying to intervene in that failure. One is to kind of dream of a perfect moment of communication. We see a model of communication here based on a kind of electronic engineering where, the idea being that actually if we try to talk to each other well enough, we can overcome the kind of fractures and wounds of colonialism. This is quite a famous example of it. Peter Brook's play Orgast, that was commissioned by the Shah from one of the Shiraz Biennales, where Brooke and Hughes decided to try and make up their own language that would sit on top of the divided, colonially divided Iranian and English languages. But there's a number of problems with that way of trying to address it, some of which I think are explored quite funnily in this cartoon. You see, we have to ask who this work is for. If there's an audience, who the audience is that it's supposed to speak to. When we're just sort of speaking in a language that we've made up, who are we actually talking to? Who are we actually bringing together? And another good example, I think, of this kind of way of trying to deal with the history of East and West and how it fails if you're trying to find this perfect moment is this. This is the building site of the Museum of Tolerance, a place where Jews, Muslims and Christians are supposed to get together to discuss their different cultural differences. The thing is, it's built on stolen land in occupied East Jerusalem. So there are actually different theories, different ways of communicating that aren't built on the notion that actually, a perfect moment is possible. And one of them is the discourse of psychoanalysis, especially in its Lacanian iteration. This is what was called the math theme in Lacanian psychoanalysis, that sort of shows different models of how people can communicate, or not communicate, but how people can kind of try and communicate in a way that doesn't aspire to this perfect moment. Lacan was very influenced and inspired by the moment of May 1968. He thought that on the one hand, like the students that were rioting in Paris were sort of showing the world new ways to order their desires and so on. But he was also very worried about certain kinds of excess in that. This is a poet called Torquato Neto. And Torquato Neto, at that 68 moment, was internationalizing through the Tet Offensive and so on. Torquato Neto was a Brazilian poet who was trying to deal with something similar to Orientalism that the Brazilian intellectuals called tropicalism. We see a good example of it here, like a series of kind of colonial stereotypes and so on. I love this picture because, white woman, like creepy, huge brown snake wrapped around her. Do you know what I mean? Like white man just off there in the background about to sort of penetrate deep into the jungle and come and save her. And so the cannibal is a big tropicalist colonial metaphor. But how did Torquato Neto and his colleagues deal with it? Well, they declared, we are all cannibals. They saw that thing that they were supposed to be haunted by and identified with it, that wound, that kind of thing. And the sense in which they were cannibals is they said, well, look, there's waves of colonization of our country. Actually, when we're trying to engage with our heritage as African slaves, indigenous colonized people and so on, we're cannibalizing all this different stuff. What struck me when I think about that in terms of psychoanalysis is in Lacanian psychoanalysis, the idea that the analysand is trying to get to try and get to grips with their own situation is that they're, unlike classical Freudian psychoanalysis, that the idea is to identify with a symptom, to find that thing that haunts you, that upsets you, that you can't get over, and really identify with it. In my latest play that's called My Brother's Country, about the Iranian singer Feridun Farrokhzad and his sister Furugh, we set the whole play in Café Naderin in Tehran. And the reason we did this because we thought there was something like a symptomatic nature of Café Naderin in terms of 20th century Iranian history, partially because of its intellectual significance on the one level of all these different people in the 70s getting together, but also because you can get some pretty terrible, like Tehran Jalesi, what my dad would call Coochy Bazari music, that's about the same thing as well. And this idea of things operating on different levels, upsetting different discourses and so on, is something that I think is typical of this kind of cultural symptom that we're trying to find. I tried to list some other examples for you. So this is a picture of the noble Drew Ali Bey. You might have heard of him, you might not have heard of him. He's formed something called the Moorish Science Temple, which was the first moment of kind of black nationalism in African American culture. And there's this interesting thing that you have here, African Americans seeking liberation through dressing as Muslims, and then in the 90s, after the Malcolm X film comes out, loads of South Asian kids in this country dressing like them to feel more Muslim. Or this is an example of kind of Orientalismo from the European Renaissance, when European scholars would look a lot towards kind of the mystical traditions of Islam and see that as something actually to aspire to. And finally, in comparison to that Museum of Tolerance, there's an artist, Daniel Kahn, who's rediscovered a lot of old Jewish rebel songs that go, for instance, a little bit like, the world will be saved and be healed by this hero who dives to the roots of his wound. In Russia, in Vilna, in Poland, all hail now, der Jiddischer Arbeiterbund. Thank you.
The 45-minute version, I think, is basically the spoken stuff, then the song goes on a bit. Do you want the mic down there, Stephanie? Okay, a warm round of applause for Stephanie Reicheld.
Okay. Well, I'm a scientist who is also an artist. And as a scientist, I do things. I'm not a surgeon. I don't do the surgery, but I do things. I look at things like this. I look at tissues. I look at cells, which come from, well, a dissecting. And but I'm also very interested in portraits. So this is a portrait of Rembrandt, as well as showing the dissection of, which we then use for microscopy. So I'm a microscopist mainly. And these are images which have been taken on different microscopes. They show you cells which are. This is a sequence, a movie of live cells. These are just stain cells with fluorescence, very small things within cells. And this is actually a developing eye from a zebrafish. It was actually a movie sequence, but we had to take it out. What I find very interesting is because photography makes some things permanent. Yeah, the purpose of photography was to have a permanent thing, an object, really, of something which is movable. But if you look at this, what I'm saying here, 20, 50 billion cells every day are actually replaced within your body. We are actually not very permanent. We are actually not the same person today, which we will be even tomorrow. And this is from cancer research, also a sequence, and it shows you when we put cells together, they start to grow and they multiply, they become more and more, and they move out, they sprout out. It looks a bit like, well, I said this in Bangalore, Bangalorean traffic, but maybe Cambridge traffic is quite like this. And then, as scientists, we don't look just at cells, but we also want to manipulate, and we want to know what is actually within cells and what makes them move. And so this is an image I put there of the same cells, but you saw before, but here they're stained with fluorescent markers. So you have 3 different colors for particular proteins. And as I said, I'm interested in portraits. So this portrait is a colleague of mine and friend, Brad Amos, who was an inventor of one of the main microscopy techniques which we use all over the world now. He's also 3 hands because he's extremely busy all the time, and he holds in his hands what we actually use. This is actually the sample, which we call it sample, which contains the cell. So we call the little metal, the little glass thing, a slide. If I magnify it for you, you can see something which I find very touching, because the each little dot here, which you see, is actually part from a breast cancer study. So each of those little tissues is a piece of tissue donated by a woman who has breast cancer, and we use it for cancer research. But it could also be actually each of those little tissues here is actually the tissue of a human. So you have lung, kidney, and I kind of like to combine this because the slide had a number, and it can also be a person. So we have this abstraction that we show a slide, which could be, I mean, the number stands for a patient or a person. So coming back to the portraits I do, I'm very interested in kind of psychological portraits, and I like how you kind of layer things when, I mean, you always have the observer, the object, and the audience who looks at your portraits. And this was one portrait which I did, which is called the Snow Queen. And we come from the culture where I think you understand the Snow Queen is a woman frozen in ice. And it also has a technical background here for me, because I did actually make sheets of ice which contains bubbles, and I did this all in my -80 freezer at work in the lab at night. And I portrait, well, I asked the model to sit behind the ice, so it's not actually frozen, but the effect is so that you have this mirror kind of from the Snow Queen, the mirror kind of the woman looking into the mirror contained in the ice, and then on the other side kind of holding here the frame. And it comes, again, a bit of a science connection here. It comes actually with a sound file, because I made these portraits and I put them onto a conductible ink poster which contains a sensor for touch, because one of the things I really find fascinating is actually having portraits or photographs being made into things again. So when you have this, I brought this actually, you can see it later, when you touch it, it will have a heartbeat. When I exhibited this, people go really scared. They were like, "Oh God, this is actually, live and has a heartbeat." And I also wanted to go, for my science background, back to the slide, which I showed you before. So the top thing is a small piece of the photograph, which I printed, and I put it on a slide. And I looked at it in the microscope again. And I thought, well, if I come closer, 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 will I actually see more? But what you actually did see was, like with here, this is actually now a tissue again, like a tissue slide. So I'm running a bit late. But you look into it more and more and more, and what you see is smaller. It's quite beautiful. But is it the same? I mean, is it meaningful? Will I see more? Will I understand the person better? I mean, there's something about going very close, going away, and maybe going away gives you more information than being very close. in science we use a technique now which gives us a much, much higher resolution, and it's fascinating for me because what we actually do, we have a very small pattern which we overlay with another pattern, and when it comes together we get a better resolution. We understand the small pattern, we can actually get the information. So by layering things we kind of start to see things. And I did an artist in residency for which I have given you information here, and I went to an Indian lab and I started to take portraits. So these are student scientists, and my initial thought was, well, in India for me is kind of something about textiles and these patterns. So I started to overlay the portraits with the textiles which I found on different kind of textile structures, the patterns and things. And I thought, wait, because these people are scientists, so what they actually, I should really use, and you can see the result actually here. So what I should do, I should use actually scientific images. So I made all the portraits out of using computer software. All the portraits now, each pixel is actually a scientific image from that person's research. Because for me, science is actually the person driving the science, in a way, makes the science into what the kind of group will discover and see. So there's always the person behind, but also, I mean, a scientist, usually we work 24/7 and we work all the time. So the science is also us. So I think kind of having this brought together, and then I made silk prints. So I had these printed on silk, which is what you see here. And there are actually multiple layers. So there's always 2 layers to each portrait, which is kind of revealing actually the portrait better than a single layer, coming back to this layering effect. And this was when I was in India. This was exhibited there in the colonnades. And I really liked all the people also were kind of touching it and working with it. And the wind was kind of making them move together in a way. And that kind of movement made the portraits visible or not so visible. And also when you come close, you see actually the cells. When you go away, you step away from it, you see actually the person again, the portrait itself. And that's it. There's all information outside if you want to pick it up.
You've had enough time. 6 minutes, 20 seconds, that's all you're allowed. Okay, next. Here he comes. He's reviewed lots of my shows in the past. Dance writer. Guys, get your own back time. Maybe in a bit. Dance writer, wonderful Donald Tutera.
References, connections, context. I quit school at 16, so I feel kind of self-made, or at least self-taught. I'm not a scientist or an academic, but I have a huge, voracious cultural appetite, and I'm a Peachy Coochy virgin, so here's to popping my cherry. Another cherry, Swedish-born Klaus Oldenburg, Spoon Bridge and Cherry, the centerpiece of the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden. Minneapolis is where I was born and bred, highly cultured city in the American bread basket, or heartland. And then silence is good, I think. Another Swede, Ann-Margaret Olsen, 60s sex kitten turned serious actress. Elvis Presley's equal, Jack Nicholson's on-screen mistress, the bean-blasted mother of Tommy, and my show business goddess. Here she's doing an iconic dance move from Bye Bye Birdie, Remember This Pose. His Girl Friday, 1940 American screwball comedy classic, the essence of wise-cracking, speedy delivery. The image alludes to journalism, my early and prolonged calling. I'm a freelance wordsmith, and I was actually around when dinosaurs, I mean typewriters, roamed the earth. No, not a headless woman, but rather a picture of select parts of Pauline Kael, K-A-E-L, brilliant movie critic for the New Yorker magazine and now, alas, deceased, best arts journalist ever. Apparently, if you sat beside her at a screening, she'd snort and elbow you in the ribs, hence the elbows. Career transition or parallel tracks. After 30-plus years as an arts writer, I began to curate, present, and create dance and other live stuff. One of my major outlets is Go Live Festival, where I've tried to provide opportunities opportunities for about 150 artistes since September 2013. Watchwords: intimacy, playfulness, unpredictable eclecticism. Another outlet: pop-up performances, Chelsea Arts Collective, also known as CAC. But what this image really is about is to show you a work, The Garden Where Pain Does Not Enter, by a remarkable Angolan-born Marxist Buddhist painter-philosopher, Lilia Pegadu, my partner in creative crime. Hey presto! The painting is now on the floor, and she who is not treading upon it is the lovely Anusha Subramaniam, South Asian sister spirit, Bharatanatyam practitioner, and one of 3 women commissioned to dance in a Pina Bauschian Chelsea church hall in response to Lilia's canvas. Center stage, Avatara Ayuso, but do observe the head above the stripy top. That is Sarah Kent, veteran visual arts critic turned kick-ass action theater improviser. Lithe, brainy, 73-year-old Sarah kicks against pricks and stereotypes, and as such is a complete inspiration. Now for Avatara. She dances for Shobana Jayasingh, whose Bayadere, the 9th life I'm seeing tonight at the Royal Opera House, but she is an enormously determined and gifted dance maker in her own right. I unofficially mentor her. William Forsythe loves her maybe as much as I do. Here is yours truly, Tripping Light Fantastic with Tim Casson at the People Dancing Conference in Cardiff last November. I was showing him the same Anne Margaret moves you saw before, my contribution to his ongoing project, The Dance We Made. Some say it in movement, others with words. Me in full flow at People Dancing Community Dance Conference, asked to summarize this event, I came up with a performance poem or wrap-up rap called Pioneers, Pragmatists, Mobilizers, Catalysts, People. The next one you have to indulge me, please. It's really just a bit of eye candy or filler, ha ha ha. You could call it Young and Old Boys in the Hood. Uh-oh, me again. Come on, come on, come on. Getting into the swing of things at the launch of Dance UK's Manifesto for Dance at the Houses of Parliament. Why there? To underline ways in which politicians can support dance. Moving right along. Nice, quiet moment. No breathlessness. Lorna V, ex-Time Out colleague, journalist, playwright. I've helped steer her into becoming a full-blown actor-performer. We are tickled sparkly pink to be part of Freshly Scratched at Battersea Arts Centre next week. I play me, interviewing her, playing a fictional tango dance diva. Recognize this cutie pie? And I wonder how many people, apart from John Cage, actually called him that. This is genius American choreographer Merce Cunningham. He wrote the short introduction for a book I co-authored, and I quote, "Dance slips between your fingers and your toes." This next anonymous cutie pie is my nod to youth, maybe eternal youth, or at the very least, some notion of a second childhood. I think he or she looks ready to be in a Cunningham dance. Psycho is next. One of the great works of art of the 20th century and my favorite film. Vera Miles, sister of shower-stabbed Janet Leigh, is in Norman Bates's bedroom. She picks up a book with a blank spine, opens it, and Hitchcock cuts away. It's one of the great unsolved mysteries of cinema. What is between the covers of Norman Bates's book? More mystery. Which side is up? How creatively fragile can you be? Can we all think outside our own boxes? Think about it. Stop thinking about it. Think about it somewhere else at some other time. No, this is not an error or a cop-out. It's a blank screen, an empty page. A blizzard of white, a void, the unknown, an infinite space, or maybe the place to pursue a vision, trust an instinct, follow a hunch, and begin to think outside that box. Thank you.
Five stars. That's a little New Art Club in joke, actually. Okay, what are we going to do? Have we got some time? We're going to have a little moment. We're going to have a moment. How many have been asked to fill? Any requests? I could do my song about Australia to promote cultural diversity, but I think some people might leave the room. How long do you think we might be, Leah? Well, good. That was the filling over. Oh. Can I just take this opportunity to remind everybody about hashtag Junctures? Hands up who knows what a hashtag is. Yeah, if you, one person. Great. You're going to be communicating with yourself for the rest of the day. Yes, let's use the hashtag Junctures. I'll be checking it later. Okay, Sarah, Magari, Agdam. Here we go.
Hi, my name's Sarah. I'm going to talk about my project, Persian Pop and Turkish Psychedelia. That's actually the short title. It's actually called Vinyl Icons, Persian Pop and Turkish Psychedelia, Music, Memorabilia, Design and Art Inspired by 1960s and 1970s Iran and Anatolia. So the first image that you saw, that was me in my crowdfunding campaign, which you can all check out soon as it'll be going live. Obviously, the main icon in the exhibition that I've been putting together was Coochy. So I thought this was quite a nice image just to display the fact that the whole of the exhibition is a mixture of the struggle between tradition and modernity. This is a Turkish record collection. It's quite censored to the image that I'll show you further on. I joined Turkey and Iran. Yeah, I've got some boob in there as well. There's going to be lots of boob in the show. I wanted to show the difference between the Iranians and the Turks, and also I know that they probably really not like to be put together as well. So I thought, yeah, I'll do that because I like to be controversial. Another picture of Coochy, which is really, really funky, and I just really love the style of the 1960s and 1970s. So I thought I got another Coochy in there. And my next image. Jimi Hendrix. Basically, as well as Coochy, she was massive inspiration for the exhibition. And I picked out this image because as well as the kitsch style of the 1960s and 1970s, which the show focuses on, I've got a nice bit of traditional Middle Eastern embroidery, and that reminded me of pate, the hand embroidery of Iran, which is in my next image. The sort of, as well as the question that was brought to the mind, it's just like a melting pot of different cultures, the Oriental, so yeah, I love that visually. And then on to my next image, which is pictures of Western women frolicking in kitsch clothing in Iran, which obviously wouldn't happen now, by quite famous Western 60s photographers. And as well as the records being banned, obviously this kind of image isn't really thought of well. But again, just totally beautiful. Just hooking people in with the visuals, less academic kind of discussions in the actual show, rather than online on the blog. You can get into that, but yeah, my first artist from the show, Coochy. I love this image because it reminds me of why I wanted to put the show together. I actually found all of these kind of tapes that looked a bit like this in my dad's scroll from 1974 in the loft, and it was basically how I connected to my father's Iranian, but my mother's Geordie. how I connected to my heritage. I've got Mava, more singers. This is all collage, similar kind of work to what was before, but in a different way. And then the next image is of a paikan, which I'm sure everybody remembers, the traditional Iranian car, and then I've linked that to pop culture. And in the show, I talk about how pop is a genre of artwork links to what's happening in Iran and how it's a response. And basically, I think all of the artists in some ways are Andy Warhol. Well, Iran does Andy Warhol. Here we have Malika Yani's family, where she's reinvented the pictures of her childhood and made them quite kitsch. And we'll be doing a workshop with children where they can bring in a photograph and reinvent their pictures. So that's quite a nice prompt onto a debate about heritage. And I've got Malika's aunts here who are really beautiful, and their red lipstick and red fingernails. And the next image is again, I think it's more than Malika's aunts, more kind of set in Iran, but with the family tree, which is, yeah, all linked quite nicely with the engagement that we've got going on. And the next artist in the next slide is Hosro Hasanzadeh, who's here today. This is one of his tile works of Gagouche. And I just picked this one because I like the detail of her hair, basically. And next we'll have another slide of Hosro Hasanzadeh's work, which he's actually made specially for the exhibition, which is being flown from Tehran. This is a massive tile piece, and it's all Velcros on the back, so that's how it can travel. But yeah, again, Andy Warhol, Iran does Andy Warhol. We've got some Arab stars in here as well. So that's quite a nice little link. And they're all hand painted, and that's in Hosro's studio. You might recognise some of the faces. And the next artist that I'm going to show you in the next slide is Mia Jafari, who isn't actually a main artist as such. She's working on the engagement project, but she actually makes silk scarves and dresses. And again, they're very kitsch. So we're going to be working with BME women to, well, eventually they'll make a dress, but they'll start with like a very small, probably the size of a tile piece. And that's my Persian popper man. Again, same as what the front image was, but we did it on a pretty much no money. So yeah, again, Jimi Hendrix shirt. Hopefully you'll be able to see this exhibition in 2016, and I would hope that everyone would like to come. It'll be in Newcastle at Vane. Yep, so...
Thank you, Sarah. Well done. And there's so much more autobiographical than I thought they were going to be, those presentations. And I think a much more kind of culturally relevant reference wouldn't be Just a Minute. I think it'd be Desert Island Discs. That's all we're going to do on the Peachy Coochy. We're going to do another one later with different slides and different people speaking, but me presenting again. So I'll see you in a bit, and we're going to have a little break in the foyer. And let's have another round of applause for all the presenters. Thank you very much.